Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
The champagne flutes were sweating, the silverware was so polished it hurt to look at, and the entire country club dining room smelled like floral arrangements and catered steak, expensive, showy, overdone. Just like her. My mother, Janice Benton, stood at the head of the banquet table, 70 years old and still commanding attention like a queen at a war council. Her dress shimmered like fish scales in the dim light, her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet, and that voice, oh, that voice loud, sharp, trained for public performance, not for tenderness. "I just want to thank you all," she declared, holding her wine glass up high as if she were blessing a congregation. 70 years. What a life, right? Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite and toothless. "I've raised 2 children. One has truly made me proud, my son, Brian." Another round of applause, more sincere this time. "And I'm thrilled to announce today that Brian will inherit the entirety of my estate. Every last thing." Not her. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Everyone else did. A pause hung in the air like wet laundry. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some curious, some sympathetic, others plainly delighted by the drama. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Not a forced one either, not that brittle, polite thing women do when they're trying to disappear. No. Mine was genuine. The kind that doesn't reach your eyes, but punches right through your soul. "Congratulations to him," I said, raising my glass slightly in his direction. "But that won't affect me because," and then I took a long sip, as if we were just toasting someone's engagement or a golf tournament win. No one spoke. No one laughed. It was like the record scratched, and they suddenly realized I wasn't the punchline they expected. That was the moment everything started turning. But that wasn't where the story began. Not really. To understand this, you'd have to go back. Back to the late 80s, back to a house with creaking floorboards and that yellow floral wallpaper my mother loved so damn much. Back to a family where Brian was the prince and I was the handmaid. My mother liked having a daughter in theory, someone to dress up for Christmas pictures, someone to do the dishes while the boys talked in the living room. But in practice, I was the backup plan. Always the backup. Brian was 5 years older and born with that slick smile, the kind that could sell broken glass as diamonds. My mother adored him, made excuses for every failing. When he crashed her car at 19, she said the brakes must have been faulty. When he dropped out of college, she said the professors didn't understand his genius. When he got a woman pregnant and bailed 3 months in, she cut a check and blamed the girl. Me? I once got a B+ in math and was told I wasn't living up to my potential. Dad was the only one who saw through it. Quiet man. Hardworking. Died too young, of course. He had this way of glancing at me when Brian was running his mouth, like he knew I was carrying more than I should and couldn't say a damn thing about it. When he got sick, it wasn't Brian who stepped in. It was me. I canceled my college plans, moved back into my childhood room, wiped vomit off tile floors at 2 in the morning, fought insurance companies, spoon-fed pureed carrots to a man who once carried me on his shoulders through the state fair. For 3 years, that was my life. Janice didn't lift a finger. Too busy. Too proud. Too afraid to see what was really happening. And when he died in that cold, white room with only me holding his hand, she cried louder than anyone, soaking up the attention like a sponge. Then she sold the house I was living in. Didn't ask, didn't warn me. Just sold it. Said it was time to move forward. So I moved forward. Slowly, quietly, strategically. And now here we were, 30 years later, at her big fancy birthday party, with her announcing my erasure like she was reading a weather forecast. She thought that moment would crush me, but people like Janice always miscalculate. They think silence means surrender. That calm means weak. That not fighting back is the same as losing. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't shown up to get included in her legacy. I had built my own, brick by brick, deal by deal. And when I smiled in that room, It wasn't because I was defeated. It was because I had already won. I knew right then. I whispered later to my friend Lydia as we walked back to our cars, her heels clicking softly in the parking lot. That party wasn't her celebration. Lydia raised an eyebrow, knowing something was up, but smart enough not to ask too much. It was mine, I said. She just didn't know it yet. The driveway to Janice's house is long and curved like she wanted it to be dramatic, which fits. She's the type of woman who always wanted guests to feel like they were arriving at something important, even when all they were doing was dropping off a casserole dish. And at the very end of that winding asphalt ribbon sits the guest house, nestled like some forgotten afterthought near the hedge line, though everyone in town knows it's not just some occasional use spot for relatives or visiting friends. No, it's Brian's domain. 15 years. He's been living there for 15 years, maybe 16 now, though no one keeps exact count because Janice won't allow it to be discussed like it's strange. According to her, Brian needs time and has been through a lot, like the rest of us haven't clawed our way through decades of broken dreams and unpaid therapy. The funny thing is, if you looked at Brian from a distance, you might not catch it right away. He's still got that old high school quarterback look. That smug half grin and a voice that can smooth over the worst kinds of bullshit with just enough charm to distract people who want to believe men like him are redeemable. I showed up unannounced on a Wednesday morning, which was intentional. I didn't want to give him time to clean up whatever version of his life he might have been pretending to live that week. He answered the door barefoot, holding a mug that said #OneDad, which was ironic on so many levels it practically made my teeth hurt. The place smelled like microwaved chicken and gym socks, and behind him, I could see a pile of unopened Amazon boxes and a half-deflated exercise ball that hadn't moved since 2019. Well, if it isn't the Ice Queen herself, he said with that practiced grin, like we were still in high school and this was just another sarcastic hallway jab. I smiled right back, sweet as saccharin. Just came to say congratulations. Mom's big announcement, that was really something. He gestured for me to come inside, stepping over what looked like 3 pairs of shoes and a gaming headset tangled in its own cord. Yeah, well, it was about time. I mean, let's be honest. You were never really interested in any of that stuff anyway, right? His tone was casual, but I heard the knife tucked beneath it. You're right, I said, walking past his dirty laundry mountain like it didn't exist. I've been focused on different things. Like, working, raising a kid, building something real. Brian flopped onto his couch, reaching for the remote. Jason's still at state? Graduating next year, I said. Full ride. Works 2 jobs. He wants to go into urban planning. He nodded like he was trying to care, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the reminder that while his 2 daughters rarely called, and one had blocked him completely, my son actually wanted to be in my life. I didn't rub it in, not with words. Just let the silence stretch long enough to make him sit with it. You've really been living here for 15 years now? I asked, walking over to the kitchen and opening the fridge without permission. Some habits die hard. That's almost 2 decades. Which is, like 120 years if you count it in mother-funded rent-free terms. He didn't catch the math mistake. Or if he did, he wasn't sharp enough to call it out. The truth is, he was used to being taken care of, by Mom, by his ex-wives, by whatever woman happened to think she could fix him that month. He was a drowning man who expected everyone else to fill his lungs with air. Mom just wants what's fair, he finally said, like he believed it. She knows I've had a tough time. Yeah, the world's been real cruel to you, I said, shutting the fridge hard enough to rattle the magnets. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs and wiping Dad's ass while you were trying to launch a startup for phone cases that double as bottle openers. He laughed, unbothered. That was actually a good idea. You were just too uptight to see it. There it was again, the rewrite of history. He's always been good at that. When he failed, it wasn't really failure. It was sabotage. Bad luck. Bad partners. Bad timing. Never him. He leaned back and looked at me like a man who already counted the victory money in his head. Look, you can be salty all you want. You can tell your little sob stories to your friends. But you can't fight the will, sis. It's done. Signed, sealed, delivered. I stepped toward the door, grabbing my keys from the counter where I'd set them. I don't need to fight it, I said with a smile that felt like a steel blade under silk. I really don't. He blinked, confused for a second, like he could almost sense that he was in danger, but couldn't figure out why. That was the beauty of it, letting him think he'd won, letting him keep swinging his dull little sword while I quietly rewrote the entire battlefield beneath his feet. As I pulled the door open, I turned back once more. By the way, I added, that coffee mug? You should probably give that to someone who earned it. And with that, I walked out, down the same driveway he's driven over for 15 years without ever once wondering who really owned the road beneath him. The last time I stood on that piece of land, it was raining so hard I could barely see the mailbox, and the for sale sign had already started to rot at the edges. That was almost 18 years ago, maybe 19 if you count it by the ache in my chest that never really left. It was 2 weeks after the funeral, 3 days after the argument with Janice, and 1 miserable hour after she told me I had until the end of the month to get out. That house had been mine in every way that mattered, emotionally, historically, practically, but never legally. And Janice had always been a woman who used the law like a scalpel. Cold, precise, and absolutely unapologetic. I remember standing in the doorway of that old colonial, the same doorway where I once waited for Dad to come home from late shifts at the auto plant, and I remember feeling this strange mix of fury and shame. I had taken care of him in those final years, changed his dressings, helped him to the bathroom, managed his meds, fought with insurance reps, scheduled the hospice visits, everything. I put my life on hold because, deep down, I believed in some invisible ledger that would balance itself out. I was wrong. Don't ever expect fairness from your mother, Dad had whispered to me once, late at night, when the morphine made him softer and more honest than he'd ever been. She only does what makes her look generous, never what actually is. I'd nodded, but I hadn't believed it yet. Not really. I still thought I could earn her love by being useful. But once Dad died, Janice snapped shut like a trapdoor. No hugs, no thank yous, no invitations to grieve together, just a letter from her lawyer and a polite suggestion I start packing my things. So I packed. And I left. But I didn't forget. Now, standing on that same land, under a much bluer sky, everything was different. The house was gone, torn down 6 years ago after I quietly bought the property through an LLC with a name so forgettable no one would question it. JCB Holdings. Jason Claire Benton. My son's initials and mine, stitched together like a secret signature. I watched from the sidelines as permits were filed, as construction trucks pulled in and out, and as the land that raised me transformed into something new, something useful. 6 small buildings. Affordable senior condos. Clean, practical, elegant in a way that didn't scream money but whispered dignity. Every unit was designed with the kind of details people forget until they matter. Extra-wide door frames for wheelchairs, soft-close cabinets for arthritic hands, emergency pull cords in every room. Even a little courtyard with shaded benches, because I remembered how much Dad loved sitting under trees when his lungs got too tired to walk. I never told Janice. Never told Brian. I didn't need to. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was reclamation. Quiet and deliberate. The kind that doesn't show up in headlines but rewrites the history of a family all the same. The day I went down to the county office, it was just supposed to be routine. A final check on titles before transferring one of the condos to a woman named Miriam whose husband just passed and who couldn't afford anything over $1,200 a month. I wasn't expecting to see Janice's name on the registrar again. But there it was, not on the condos, no. That would have been a far bigger problem. It was on an adjacent sliver of land, technically part of the original lot before it was split off during zoning. I stared at the screen. Parcel number 389, F, registered to Janice A. Benton, but underneath, in the fine print, something else caught my eye. A transfer restriction clause, one I'd had inserted years ago, buried inside a debt settlement Janice had signed when she needed quick money to bail Brian out of a failed bar venture. She never read the documents herself, just signed where the attorney told her to. And that little clause, 6 lines of dry legalese, meant she couldn't sell, transfer, or develop that sliver without approval from the majority stakeholder of the parent parcel. Which, of course, was me. I sat back in the cheap vinyl chair at the county office and let the weight of it settle in. She didn't even know she'd already lost. She thought her power came from what she owned, from what she dangled in front of others like a carrot. But real power comes from owning what no one else sees, from being 5 moves ahead, not 1, from smiling while they gloat because you already laid the trap years ago. That evening, I walked the perimeter of the lot, stopping at the edge of that untouched sliver of land where weeds still grew high and forgotten. It wasn't worth much on paper, maybe $20,000 at best. But symbolically, it was priceless. It was the final knot in a noose she'd tied herself, thinking it was a necklace. I kicked at the dirt and said to no one, she's still living like she's the queen of the chessboard. Doesn't realize she's been playing checkers this whole time. And I meant every word. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in sitting across from a man who wears $500 shoes and still knows he's not the smartest person in the room, not because he's slow, not because he's lazy, but because he recognizes that real power doesn't dress itself in loud suits or oversized egos. It moves quietly in whispers and paperwork, in the kinds of contracts people don't bother reading because they assume the person handing it to them wouldn't dare bury a knife in the fine print. The lawyer's name is Stephen Krause, and I've been working with him for over a decade now, ever since the day I realized that being the dutiful daughter was never going to get me anything but headaches and the back end of someone else's gratitude. We met that morning in his office on the east side of town, the one nestled above a furniture consignment store and across the street from a bakery that sells the best cinnamon rolls in 3 counties. The office itself is plain, beige walls and 2 mismatched chairs, but that's the point. Nothing about this setup invites questions, and that's exactly how I've always liked to operate. Stephen handed me a folder thick with documents, and without needing to ask, I already knew what was inside. It was confirmation in legalese and notarized ink that the last piece of the puzzle was now exactly where I wanted it to be. With the signature Janice had scribbled 7 years ago, the one she'd given in a hurry, trying to keep Brian's failed venture from tanking her credit. She had unknowingly surrendered 60% of her total real estate holdings to an entity called Ridge Hall Development Holdings. That was the name on the paperwork, the name on the bank account, the name she never thought twice about. But Ridge Hall wasn't real, at least not in the way she thought. It was a shell legally registered, fully compliant, and managed by a board consisting of 1 person and 1 trust, me, operating as the sole trustee of JCB Holdings, the same trust I'd built in my son's name and mine. Over the past 11 years, I'd used it to move funds, buy property, and quietly inject capital into projects no one knew I was part of. Janice didn't just hand over control of some unused parcel. She handed over her future without ever realizing the ink had dried. And the best part? I used her own pride to make it happen. When Brian's 4th venture, some ridiculous mobile app for pet horoscopes, if you can believe that, needed quick capital, Janice was too embarrassed to go through a bank. She didn't want questions, didn't want scrutiny. So she turned to a private silent investor with a good reputation and quick turnaround time. That investor was Ridge Hall. And when the project inevitably failed, because I made damn sure it would, she was left owing more than she could pay in cash. So she paid in property. What Janice never understood, what Brian never even imagined, is that every one of his failures was engineered. I funded them anonymously, made sure the teams he partnered with were incompetent, let the ventures circle the drain while I watched from a safe distance. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because I knew neither of them would ever stop taking if I didn't build the wall myself. Every dollar I gave him was a rope, not to lift him up, but to let him hang himself a little more with each arrogant assumption that he was untouchable. And now, after years of silent maneuvering, I own the land her house sits on. Not technically the house itself, not yet, but the soil beneath it, the access road leading to it, and the easements required for plumbing and electrical. Without my consent, she can't sell. Without my signature, she can't refinance. She's trapped in a palace she no longer commands. That afternoon, I drove up the winding road to her house, the one she's so proud of, with its manicured hedges and the stupid little bronze bird bath out front that hasn't had a bird in it since Clinton was president. She opened the door wearing one of those silk scarves around her neck, the kind women like her think makes them look rich instead of desperate. "Didn't expect to see you so soon after the party," she said, voice like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "I figured we should talk," I replied, stepping inside without asking. "About property. About legacies." She raised an eyebrow and led me to the sitting room, that ridiculous museum of outdated elegance she still insists on calling the drawing room. Brian was nowhere in sight, probably sleeping off another beer and blaming his hangover on allergies. "I've been thinking," she said, seating herself like royalty. "You've always been a bit dramatic, Claire. Always emotional. I hope you're not letting this inheritance thing eat away at you. It's not personal. It's about loyalty." Brian stayed close. "You walked away." I let her talk. Let her keep digging that hole. Then I smiled. "Oh, I never walked away," I said, leaning forward so she could see the steel in my eyes. "I just walked ahead." She tilted her head, confused by the calm in my voice. She didn't know, not yet, that the storm was already under her feet, not in the sky. And when it hit, it wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be precise, elegant, and irreversible. Just like everything I'd built. It was the morning after the party, and the sky had that dull, overcast shade of gray that never commits to rain but still manages to press down on your chest like a weight you didn't know you were carrying. I woke up at 6, not because I had to but because I always do, a habit left over from those years when I was balancing paperwork, parenting, and grief all at once without dropping anything fragile. I made coffee, black, hot, strong enough to punch through the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I watched the steam rise from the mug and thought, today's the day she learns. While Janice had been basking in the glow of her carefully engineered social triumph, publicly disinheriting me like a queen flicking crumbs off her banquet table, I had been finalizing signatures with 3 attorneys, a municipal development officer, and one very eager nonprofit director from the County Library Commission. All the gears had clicked into place behind the curtain, quiet as breath, silent as smoke. And now, at exactly 10:30 in the morning, her phone would ring, and her lawyer, the very same man who once smiled at me like I was a waitress refilling his water, would inform her that the land she believed she still held was, in fact, no longer hers. Not the guest house, not the surrounding acreage, not even the little patch of woods she had always intended to sell off once Brian got his act together, though of course we both knew he never would. Thanks to years of careful restructuring, subdivision, and legally binding clauses wrapped in mundane language, I had surgically stripped the value from under her without ever raising my voice. The trust one had created, JCB Holdings, now owned everything she once held over me like a sword. Brian, bless his clueless heart, had slept through most of the party's fallout and woke up late to a voicemail from Mom, voice shrill with confusion and outrage. He called me around noon, probably thinking he could intimidate me with that same smirking arrogance that once worked in high school hallways and late-night family dinners. I let him speak, let him accuse, let him rant about betrayal and trickery and legal theft, which was rich considering his idea of financial responsibility was cashing in on other people's pity. "You tricked her," he said, pacing, probably barefoot, his voice bouncing off the walls of that guest house he never paid for. "You used all that sneaky legal language, and now you think you're the hero?" I didn't respond for a moment because sometimes silence is louder than outrage. Then I said, calm and clean, no, Brian. I don't think I'm the hero. I just stopped being the extra. He sputtered some nonsense about family, about legacy, about dad, which was especially insulting considering he hadn't visited the cemetery in over a decade. But when I told him what I'd done with the land, the breath caught in his throat so loud I could practically hear it clatter to the ground. I donated it, I said, to the county. Not all of it, just the corner lot. The part with the best view, the southern exposure, the one that gets the breeze in the afternoon. What the hell for? He demanded, voice hoarse with disbelief. For a library, I answered. The new community library. It's already in motion. Signed, stamped, approved. And it'll bear Dad's name on the front. Benton Memorial Library. He didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. I could hear the silence like a storm before it hits. You did this just to spit in her face, he said finally. No, I said, I did it so our name could mean something again. So, it didn't end with her bitterness, or your wasted chances. I did it because legacies are built, not inherited. And I built mine. That evening, I drove past the property. The surveyor's flags were already staked into the ground, small, brightly colored markers fluttering like whispers of what's to come. I rolled down the window and let the breeze in, thick with pine and dust and something that almost smelled like redemption. I thought about my father and the way he used to underline passages in his books. How he once told me that the most powerful thing a person can do isn't make noise, it's to be undeniable in silence. Janice screamed her victories. Brian bragged about his plans. I buried my moves in soil and signatures, and now here we were. She thought inheritance was about money. She thought it was about control, about being the one who gets to speak last. But she was wrong. Inheritance is about impact. About what outlives you. About whose name is whispered by strangers long after you're gone. I sat there for a while, just watching the light fade over the land. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was about setting the balance right. About not letting their bad decisions write my ending. And if someone out there thinks that makes me cold, or petty, or vindictive, maybe they're right. But trust me, I'm not done yet.